Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Lunch and Learn with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I'm Tiana Davis, the Outreach Specialist with the Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. With me as co hosts today are Kyla Hannington, also from the Office of Human Rights, and Dr. Audrey Lau, the Adult and Senior Services Specialist with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. Lunch and Learn is a joint partnership between our offices and has brought us many interesting speakers and topics that help our mission of creating opportunities to build understanding across diverse peoples. We are honored to constantly be joined by such incredible guests, and we're excited to introduce you to today's Lunch and Learn guest, V. Castro. V. Castro is a two-time Bram Stoker Award nominated Mexican American writer from San Antonio, Texas, now residing in the UK. She writes horror, erotic horror, and science fiction. Her books include Immortal Pleasures, The Haunting of Alejandra, Alien Vasquez, Mestiza Blood, The Queen of the Cicadas, Out of Azatlan, Las Posadas, Rebel Moon, and the Pink Agave Motel and The Goddess of Filth. Her forthcoming book is a YA short story collection, Teano Tales, To Tell in the Dark and Tales of the Dark Feminine, inspirational stories of the world's fiercest goddesses. Welcome, V. Can you get
Hello.
us, hi, can you get us started by introducing the audience to Queen of the Cicadas?
Yeah, the Queen of the Cicadas. My great grandparents were migrant workers and were from South Texas. And, I have photos of them, working the fields, picking cotton, going up north to pick blueberries, um, traveling everywhere for work. And my family, settled in Texas. On my father's side, they came from Guadalajara and settled in Texas as well. And I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to migrant work and people who come from immigrant families, and also kind of debunk the myth that everybody's illegal, because as mentioned in the book, there in the 40s, there was the Bracero program that actively sought out Mexican workers to do the work of soldiers who had, men who had gone to fight the war. Similar to like the Windrush in the UK and other programs when there's a need for labor. So I wanted to discuss that, but also at the same time I started writing this, there was a book that came out called American Dirt. By a Caucasian woman, and it was quite offensive. But what was more offensive is that the advance she received and all of the accolades and the attention. However, publishing disproportionately does not, publish the stories written by the people who are experiencing those stories or come from those places. So the Queen of Cicadas was just like this ball of history, love, rage, hurt, frustration, and it just came out into this story.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a bit, and this is jumping ahead, but the character Tanya, she reminded me of Carolyn Bryant Donham, the woman who led to Emmett Till's like murder, and till her dying breath, she never admitted any wrongdoing. She was the victim in it. Was that a parallel that was intentional, or?
You know what? In general, it was a almost like a metaphor, or she was to all of these injustices by inflicted upon people of color in these scenarios, especially when back in the day. Well, one could offer or say it hasn't changed much, but when we didn't have policing, evidence, DNA, body cams, CCTV wasn't a thing, where we could actually had evidence of what has happened. For example, George Floyd, we knew exactly what happened, right? The way it was spun, that's a different thing. But we had physical evidence, whereas back then it was just, someone's word against the other, and well, who's going to believe who, especially in the South, and so yeah, it was just this kind of like not being believed, when you are othered, when you are in the most vulnerable position as possible. And so yeah, it was just kind of for all of these historical kind of wrongdoings.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. And I felt the parallels too between you, like, I don't think I knew that when Mexicans came over to help on farms that they were picking cotton as well. And I don't know why, because the farms didn't change, right? Just the people who were working them did. Um, I don't know. It reminds me of the conversation we had last night where it was just there's a lot of things we don't know unless you're taught by someone from that culture, because it's pretty much erased from American history that's taught, right? Um, yeah. Audrey, did you want to? Oh,
Sure.
did you?
Because I wore a shirt just for you today. So
No.
I was told I have to show it. So cue the cicadas. Done by the Bitter Southerner, who, if you haven't heard, is a website journalism about the South. And Bitter Southerners are not what they sound like. They're very supportive and very of a worldly cultural South, and inclusive and everything like that. But cicadas. Okay, I love cicadas, and there are a lot of bugs in this book. And so my question mainly is, for you writing this genre, what do the cicadas represent? Because for me, cicadas are beautiful, they're fleeting, they're not cute when they come out of the ground. But like they're summer, like it's like cue the cicadas, it's summer, and so it's not necessarily something I associate with death. So what's with the bugs?
So in like mythology, a lot of goddesses and are associated with the natural world, because when they were worshipped, the natural world was God. That was what we worshipped, right? And she's associated with lots of different things, as you see in the book, the snakes and all these. And certainly in Aztec mythology, Mother Nature and nature is animals, jaguars, snakes are sacred. And insects, spiders, they all have this meaning. With like Santa Muerte, she has an owl on her shoulder. And when it comes to cicadas, growing up in Texas, they make this noise, and it would always, yes, made me think of summer, but also they were quite gross because their shells would cling to the trees. And as kids, we'd take them off and throw them at each other and crinkle them, and they'd be on the ground and you'd scrunch them. And it was just this like very like visceral kind of reminder of death and something being decaying and left over, right? Even though it is transformation. But in Aztec mythology, some say she was born a human woman, a human baby, a girl, and was tossed into a cenote and transformed to the goddess as she died, and went through the underworld into the cenote. And they represent transformation. Death in that culture is about transformation. Santa Muerte as well. Death isn't the end. When you reach Mictlan, if you go into one certain area, it's 9 levels, so you reach enlightenment. So death is not the end. It's really the beginning of just another state of being, another state of consciousness. And so the cicada just for me represented that, but it also had such vivid memories of this Texas at growing up and what it felt like to be there.
So just to piggyback on that question, the sense of cinnamon and smoky chocolate and kind of made me hungry, but like in a horror book, not so much. So like, is this sensory experience part of that, or is, I kind of have a sense of why those smells, but if you could just talk a little bit about that, because it's kind of fun to know that like these people aren't going to sneak up on me entirely. Like there are signs.
I wanted her to be sensual. I wanted to bring her alive and make her part of this world, because again, the gods were not like the Virgin Mary or Jesus, like, God, they really lived, and they had this duality. They weren't all good and benevolent, but they're not all bad. Not that the Old Testament God was benevolent by any means. I mean, God, he what he did to poor Lot and all sorts. I mean, he wasn't nice, but I wanted there to be a sensuality to her. I wanted there to be a liveliness. I wanted her to be, part of what living is, and have people know that she's there, and not death and decay, because she's not dead. She's in another state of consciousness and brought into this world. So like, for example, in Haitian voodoo, we got Mama Brigitte, who's like in the cemetery, and she drinks spiced rum. And you have, her consort who likes to smoke cigars, and they're just these very alive beings that are sensual and exhibit different aspects that we can relate to. And I wanted to bring that into it, but also culturally, cinnamon and chocolate and those things are part of the culture. But again, it was part of bringing people into that sensual experience.
Were you gonna ask something, Audrey?
Nope, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Belinda and Hector were like, they became fast friends, and like, was it intentional to have them have sort of similar backgrounds where they both came from childhoods that they sort of wanted to separate themselves from, but then, not too much? It seems like they didn't want to be too separated, and like they were brought together by trying to restore the memory of Milagros. So yeah, can you talk about their friendship, their relationship a bit?
Yeah, I think like when you meet someone and you vibe, and you're kind of, when lonely people meet, or you meet someone, again, you vibe with, and you kind of have this understanding. There's kind of, you just get this energy, you feel it. And I think they were two people looking for something, and they found it in each other, and I wanted it to be not romantic. Because they were going on these inner journeys, and some of those journeys have to be done alone first. And I think, when you grow up with different conflicting identities, again, meeting other people who've gone through that or experiencing it, especially, I am Mexican American, and I don't speak Spanish because of, how I was raised. My mom speaks Spanish now, my aunts, but like my generation, most of us in my family do not speak Spanish. And it's only, some of us do, but a lot of us don't. And there are a lot of, and you just grow up almost feeling like, well, like if you've been to Mexico, it's very different than Texas, and there's all these conflicting things like, well, where do I belong? Who am I? How much of this do I have to be, or how little of it? And so I wanted that to show in their friendship as well. Again, like two kind of searching souls who found kind of a shelter within each other in their friendship.
I want to start with Milagros. She is kind of the star, if you will, of the story. She's the reason why you really pull us in with her. And I wanted to know if she's kind of a true story of someone you knew or knew of, or a story that you'd heard, or is this kind of like a composite for you of different women who come and work, or came and work, because we're talking about that a different generation than what we would know now.
Yeah, I mean, she represents all of the nameless, faceless, as American Dirt would put us out to be, women of color who clean, clean up after families, change diapers, cook food, pick, produce, and they go forgotten, they go nameless, they're not human, they're not worth anything but their labor and what they contribute to someone else's life, to someone else's dream. And that is a composite of all those women that do these jobs that help other people live their dreams or have an easier life when their lives are not easy at all. But they are human. They have desires. They have loves. They are lovers. They're mothers. They're all these things. And so it was a composite because in the Bracero program, it was just for men. They only wanted men. But obviously, people still came through, brought their families. And I just wanted, again, to have this character and pour into this character all of these injustices and hurts that I've seen and I felt.
And they don't ask for it. They don't like they're there to work. They have, like you said, their dreams, their hopes, and these people who they happen to be on their farm just walk all over them. And just, there's so much hatred in these characters. And I wish I could say maybe a year ago I might have thought, no, not, but yeah, absolutely. You could have just exchanged the characters in this book for me. Segregation South, same era, same time, and it's the way she dies that really that call to us, that I feel like this is the first book I've ever rooted for the quote unquote villain in such a way that I wanted them all to suffer. And I was like, how did you do that to me? You did that to me. but I feel like that's good writing, when I can just have these very visceral, like, okay, you just mess with her, and this is the, and you really, this book really, I wanted to know. And that's, I just really appreciated that. Your writing, from the very beginning, we meet Milagros and she is our character. She is, we're reading from her from moment one. And that was a very different experience than I thought.
You're going to make me cry. I'm getting like all emotional. See, the perimenopausal woman getting emotional here. No, I mean, and that's what I wanted to show is like, because so many times these women, and I've certainly felt it, and I know my mom has felt it and my great grandmother, go through their lives being the villain, feeling like the villain, being villainized for no reason except that we exist. Oh, you want my man. Oh, you're lazy. Oh, you're angry. Oh, we're trying to just get ahead, live our lives, be happy. And it still unfortunately happens today. And so that's why I wrote her. And it was like, for me, a really powerful thing to do. Again, when American Dirt came out, to see this woman get lauded for this book that was just absolute garbage and just everything that's wrong in like in big industries. And I had to just go for it. I did not hold back. But also the death, that kind of it's slow and it's fast at the same time. And that's what I think happens when grow up in society. Your death of your identity and your dreams, it's slow and it's fast at the same time, right? Okay. It's fast in the sense that, yeah, you know what? You get rejected, you get put down, you get pushed out so many times that I can't do it anymore. Or you just, you give up. And that's the worst thing is, seeing people who have a lot of promise or who have something to offer and they give up, or their potential isn't realized because of gatekeeping, because of bullying, because of all these different things.
I wanted to go back to something you said. And it reminded me of the fact that, while I was reading this book earlier in the book, I did read it as Tanya was jealous of not only Milagros, but everyone that Billy, had his eye on. But then you wrote when Belinda goes to Mexico, Belinda says, "Oh, she was murdered by a hate crime. She was, or I think she was the victim of a hate crime." And then it occurred to me that, yeah, that is a hate crime. That's exactly what happened, and it took this long, from it happened in the 50s, and it took until the 20 teens for someone to say that, to acknowledge that.
Oh,
You lost Tiana.
yeah.
Well, I will pick up.
Sorry, Tiana.
Come back. Well, I guess one of the things that I know that we had talked about last night when we were discussing this book was how you were able to create this urban legend, if you will. But my question to you was, is it actually an urban legend? Is the queen, does she exist? Is she, and if she's someone that comes out of you, I mean, like I said, I cheered for her, which was a first for me. But at the same time, what do you need to create a compelling urban legend?
Honestly, I will say I wanted this to be the Latino Candyman because I love Candyman. That's like one of my favorite. However, I wish it was written by someone with a little more melanin. But again, that's publishing, right? But Candyman, I just love it. Tony Todd, the whole thing, right? And I was like, oh man, I want to, seeing it, in the projects. My mom grew up in the projects, and I was like, I want to write a Latino Candyman, but in the South, in Texas, like, because it's just one of those iconic stories that I grew up with. But it is something I just made up. And again, I wanted it to be in the like one of those things that you could really see happening, because we have Bloody Mary, we have Candyman. There's a lot of these legends where you look and you say a name and they come out. And I love those. I grew up with those kind of stories, and it just was something I wanted to do.
I have not looked in a mirror seriously since then in a way that has been meaningful. Let's just say that, and I read this book during the day, hoping to like not disturb my dreams because I'm a visual person. But it was really something I Google. When I Google, that's when I know it's good, because it's like it's so realistic, and I'm like, is it based on something? This is fun. So go ahead, Tiana. I like completely.
I know we lost you there.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. I appreciate it, Audrey. I was just gonna ask, can you talk about why it was important for this to be a hate crime, like have it be named a hate crime, as opposed to just like woman on woman jealousy, like over a boy?
Because they hated her first and foremost because of her being different, her being Mexican, her, in some ways, being more attractive, apparently, or, we need others to pour our hate into, our frustrations, our disappointments. And what better way than someone who is disposable, someone who we don't see any value in, someone that is different. And they hated her just for existing. So that's why it was a hate crime, and not just like jealousy. It was so much more than that, because it's the culture. It was the culture across the South, and it's got to be called out for what it is, even to this day now, stuff that's happening.
Yeah. Well, because there's more to this than just what I would say is like a dispute among two women. It is a very personal, visceral, terrible way to die. I mean, but it requires hate, and hate requires knowledge. And I feel like with these two characters, there was never a question in my mind that this wasn't a hate crime at all. I was like, oh, no, honey, don't go by yourself. Don't be in that spot. They're going to cut you. As soon as they showed up, I was like, okay, this is it. This is terrible. 3 white women and one Hispanic woman. This is not good odds. Okay, turn on the lights. Because it's written in a way, but there was a part of me that really felt that this was very realistic. And it was one of those things that until I worked on an oral history project with migrant farmers when I was doing my undergrad in Gettysburg, I didn't have a real sense of the fear of white people until I met with a woman and interviewed her. And she really became a light to me in really helping me understand the migrant community that came through the United States. And we were only supposed to talk for an hour. I managed to keep it to 3, and then I came back a few times because I really was blown away. My questions were blown out of the water within the first 2 minutes because I had made assumption after assumption. But I really had no previous experience with someone who was really afraid to bring me into their home. And she kept apologizing. I said, really, you're fine. I would love some tea. I'm going to sit down, let your kids run through the room, but she was really having a hard time. But by the end, I felt like we'd created a rapport. But this reminded me of that initial moment of that meeting of, someone being uncertain in my presence and not liking it. I didn't like that. I didn't like that I had that kind of, I hate to say it, a power, a force or whatever. And I wanted to crawl under that sofa because I felt like the first few times that we met, it was really hard on her. I mean, it's just really hard. But her story was important to me, and her experience taught me so much. I mean, it was, but it's one of those things that, like, for people like Tanya in this story, it's impossible for someone of that character mindset to even have the mentality to say, well, wait a minute, hold on. What's it like from her perspective?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, this is the thing, like the fear goes both ways. And I think when you have that visceral fear, so for example, I want to go back to your story and part of the book. I don't know if you remember when the girl who finds her is sitting in the kitchen
with the eggs.
And she is not happy. She's scared. She's sitting in here, like in this house, having to eat, having to, be grateful. And it is just this, I wanted it to be a cringe moment, but that's kind of how I completely understand what you're saying. And that's kind of how I reflected it.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in here as we're talking about these characters and Tanya. Is it Tanya or Tanya in your mind?
Tanya.
Early in the book, Belinda, we sort of see this early sense of self where she describes herself as a kind of monstrous, sort of horrible person. And I really resonated with that. I'm familiar with that kind of self-talk. And as the book progresses, we see monsters, right? Like that are like these sort of supernatural monsters. Okay. But of course, the real monsters in the book are neither Belinda nor the supernatural creatures. And I loved how you did that I didn't feel like it was heavy-handed, but it was very clear. And I want to sort of go from there to take Audrey and I have sort of a similar question. So I'm just going to grab it from you, Audrey, as it relates to this, because I thought about this genre as such a way to tell this story. And so I was hoping that you could talk about how the genre that you write in, where you bring in, again, we have maybe some supernatural scary things, but the real scary things are not those creatures, right? The real scary things are the flesh and blood humans who just do absolutely horrible things. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about genre books or literature is that you can go into those dark places. Okay. Look, you're not going to find it in the supermarket, but you can actually say, okay, I want to talk about grief. I want to talk about jealousy. I want to talk about racism. Let's go to these dark places. And again, you know, we have these tropes like the vampire, the werewolf, the ghosts, demons, all these things. And you can utilize those to show the darker aspects of humanity, of ourselves, the things that most people do not want to recognize in themselves or others. A lot of people walk around wearing masks. A lot of people, you know, we look at, for example, John Wayne Gacy. I mean, he was a clown. You know, all these people who have done horrible things, and they wear a mask. But how do you talk about that without talking about the true crime, or talking about, you know, grief and how it can just eat you alive, or self-loathing, absolutely hating yourself, looking in the mirror, thinking you're absolute dog shit, or depression, instead of just saying, I just couldn't get out of bed all day. I just didn't want to. Nope. If you know, you know, but some people won't know. And so how do you bring that? How do you describe? How do you really get people to empathize about what depression is? So I wrote a book, The Haunting of Alejandra, about postnatal depression and generational trauma in women. And how I was like, how am I going to describe what it feels like to just given birth to my third child, not wanting to be a mom, hated the idea all 9 months of being a mom, even hated it after, loved her to death, would die for this child, but at the same time, just absolutely was done, did not want to mom at all. How do you, even when we live in a society where being a mom and don't get too old, don't let your eggs rot, you know, find a man, or, you know, whatever, get married. And it is so hard. It's one of the hardest things. And what about, you know, the women who motherhood is forced upon them? How does that feel? So I utilized the folk tale of La Llorona, the woman who drowned her 2 children and killed herself, to show postnatal depression, because how else can you describe someone murdering their 2 children and herself? I mean, obviously the person could be psychotic, or, you know, but I wanted to really get into something that women really experience that's real, but it isn't talked about because it's shameful to not love being a mother every second of the day, or even worse, say, I actually don't want kids ever, you know? And so I had to put that in. So for me, horror allowed me to do that. I used folklore again. I used the generation of women that I knew. You know, my mother left 6 kids. 2 of them died, but she abandoned 6 kids. She just left. We've never, ever been able to find out what happened to her. And in the book, I include her and I use her real name. And in the book, she, you know, succumbs to this thing, the haunting of Alejandra, this thing, and literally just disappears off the face of the earth and leaves nothing but her shoes behind. You know, that's what horror does, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Like you know, and I think also for viewers, right? Like I really want to take a moment and talk to you out there. If you're somebody who's like, yeah, I don't read that. And I'm saying that as someone who would have said that before, you know, the last couple of weeks. I want you to know that this book, and I think it's really, for me, given me this entree into seeing how horror or sometimes Gothic suspense can be a way to do what you just heard from V, and talk about very real human experiences. And this book was not, I didn't find, like, I wasn't frightened reading the book. I mean, or if I was frightened reading the book, I was frightened by what I just talked about, like the real human characters, right? Tanya and her buddies, and the wife of the person who's like, eat your eggs and be grateful, and also you're not that sad because you ate your eggs. Like, I mean, that, like, those real human characters that, like, you can read and see real people in, that is scary. The supernatural stuff for me that's not frightening. So for those watching who are like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this genre, I encourage you to, it's not that scary. And I think it is a way to have those very real human experiences, and clearly show who the actual villains are. So it was great. I really appreciated it. And thank you for that detailed response.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that too, I think one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of books banned right now is that horror is, if we don't want to call it horror, bad things happen to people who often can't do anything about their circumstances. They're just kind of caught in that circumstantial. And, because as a historian, like, one of the things that I've always thought is, if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, then you aren't reading the right kind of history, because history is really uncomfortable. It puts, especially if we're telling the whole story, we're often putting people, and like Kyla said, the bad people, the villains in the story are actually usually regular everyday people who've placed people in these terrible circumstances and decided that they look a certain way or act a certain way that they don't like, and they respond to that in a way that is so visceral. And so it's not that I was, like I said, I'm cheering for the villain here, but I'm also like, wow, like, I'm really seeing this genre as a way to really talk about the evil that we actually have in our own societies, the evil that it resides in all of us, and let's call it what it is, the racism that is kind of inherent in our culture, our history, and everything that really needs to be brought out into the light of day and said, this is, because Milagros is not the only woman who's ever disappeared in this country, and bad things have happened, and I'm sure for me, it's one of those things that people should not act this way, so it's one of those things I think you do really well. And I'm just curious, your other books, does this theme come out in some of your other books? Because after we talked last night, I was like, I really want to read more of her. So can you give us some insight here?
Yeah. So you've got the Queen of Cicadas, and then Goddess of Filth has another Aztec deity. And the reason why it's called Goddess of Filth is because that is the kind of translation of her Nahuatl name. And these girls, it's like, I always describe it as like The Craft meets The Exorcist. These girls are having a seance. They're kind of coming of age in between college and high school and college. And they hold a seance. They're not prepared for what they've called. But some people like to say, oh, well, it's when possession actually goes good. So, you see this goddess and this girl being possessed, but what does it all mean? And this like priest, and and it's a novella. I talked about The Haunting of Alejandra, which is about generational trauma, starting from the invasion in Mexico all the way up to modern times. So it opens with the main character, and she's Alejandra, and she's suicidal. She's in the shower, and she just her kid's banging on the door, and she does not know what to do anymore. And then Immortal Pleasures, I wanted to do something a bit different. I wanted to go very spicy, but also I wanted to utilize history again. So, and do it in a way that wasn't just trauma, that wasn't just let's just have this heroine and make it this story. No, I wanted her to win. I wanted her to have some fun too, and I love vampires, and most vampire stories are like centered around men, or they're European, which fair enough, that's where it evolved, but I want to open the trope up. So Cortez had a translator, he really did, named Malinali. And she was a slave. And historically, you always see these in Mexico, these pictures of her draped on his horse or her clutching him. And I'm like, and I am so sick in like romance. And, you know, historically, we've had all these stories, the whole like slave and master trope. Oh no. Oh no. Okay. She was enslaved, all right? And she was his translator. She had to do what she had to do. And so I show kind of their relationship in a very realistic way. I don't personally write about rape or molestation or anything or sexual assault, but I showed everything else until she dies. And she really did die of like smallpox, like many of the indigenous population of 28, but her history was erased essentially, even though she knew all the languages. He leaned on her to understand the cultures. She's a very important figure, but again, she was erased. And so I wanted to show her history, but then also open it where she's an immortal and she's rich and she's living her life. But you also see that vulnerable side, that fear. And she's actually hunting the world to take back stolen treasures. You know, she's one of her goals is to get one of the headdresses that resides in Austria. It really does. One of the last Aztec headdresses is in Austria, of all places.
No repatriation.
And so this is what this book is about, her being this immortal vampire, doing this work, but also having very graphic experiences with guys in this love triangle, not Cortez or any of these horrible people. And she ends up getting revenge, which is sweet. But it takes you on her journey. And then I have short story collections. The Pink Agave is all mythology, but it's very spicy. Mestiza Blood is like urban legend, mythology, some spicy, some not. But again, I wrote this story called Nightmares and Ice, and I utilized the myth of La Lechuza, and a girl whose whole family has been detained by ICE, and now she's living out of a car. She has a baby. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't want to go back to the house. She's sleeping in her car. They kick her out of Walmart, and she's in her car with this crying baby. She needs diapers. She needs formula. Her milk is drying up. And this thing lands in her car and is like, I have money, and coughs up these coins. Follow me. And it's like this fight to the death. Recently I went to the US and was really hassled. I've been going back for 18 years and I was completely hassled, taken to a back room. They took my passport. It was the scariest experience I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah, it's totally different.
And I was like, I kept saying, I'm an American citizen. What did I do? What's happening? And they wouldn't tell me when they were escorting me to the back. And I could not believe it. And it made me think of that story. But how they're profiling, it's never happened to me before. And I'm like, I'm going back in June for an event, and I'm worried.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I write these stories. Some are spicy because I do really like writing erotic horror. Again, there aren't very many women of color writing in the spicy area or romance or even horror. So I like to just go everywhere. And then my YA book is, again, it's young, for young kids.
This is what I unmuted because I was like, I want to talk about the upcoming book. Yeah, when is that coming out, and when you talk about young kids, like what's your target range?
I would say a 12-year-old could read it.
Okay.
Not be scared. 12 and up, right? And I just wanted to. It's called Tejano Tales to Tell in the Dark because that was like. One of my scary stories to tell in the dark was one of the first books I read, and I loved it. I was obsessed.
I read that book. I just think I read that book. You're taking me back to my childhood. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, but me, being, you know, back in the day, I went from that to like Stephen King and V.C. Andrews, reading Flowers in the Attic. And
I think you and I might be the same age because this all sounds very
I'm 45.
familiar.
Yeah, I'll be 46.
Oh, no, we're not the same age. I got a few years
Okay.
on you. But yes,
Like the pre
same-
Goosebumps age.
yeah.
You know what? I skipped Goosebumps. I never read Goosebumps, or, you know, I definitely didn't read Sweet Valley High. But I wanted to like have something that, you know, there's a story about La Llorona, but La Llorona Light. It's La Llorona's daughter, actually, from her perspective of the daughter. And then there's, you know, a story about Hot Dog Man. And then there's a story about a quinceañera that goes wrong with werewolves and these bullies, and, you know, just fun stuff, you know, these South American, what you call elves, in one, you know, and just all sorts of things. So, and, you know, having kind of magic and all these different ideas. And then the goddess book that's coming out, you know, I got to dive into, like, you know, I mentioned Mama Brigitte and Oshun and Yamaya and Hecate, Kali, and dive into all these powerful deities and tales, and showcase kind of their mythology, but also to have a little wisdom, like what can we glean now from these fierce feminine icons. Lilith is in there, but I wanted to do it across cultures because I practice. I'm a Santa Muerte devotee, and I practice brujeria, but I'm also really interested in like Santeria and voodoo and all of these practices that people use to stay connected to their roots and their ancestors, but also are in the modern world. And I think it's quite powerful to be connected to your ancestors and your ancestry. There's a lot to learn from that. So I like these belief systems.
When is that coming out? The goddess.
Oh, which one?
The book about the goddesses, like that. What you were just
Oh,
talking
October.
Okay, so I'm just already inviting you back. We'll talk later, but
Yeah.
I would love to read that. I'm so excited about that, and we would love to. You know, we'll talk more. But that sounds
October. Amazing. I've got like two things coming out. Also an anthology, Latin American short stories that I edited. I wrote the intro and I edited it, but all these stories across cultures, and it's beautiful. And then the goddess book, but I wanted something powerful to give us something, you know, at this time where people are questioning their power, their worth, their place in the world. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's fear, but where there's fear, there can be hope. And when there's hope and people have something to believe in, and especially themselves, good things can happen.
Well, I think that what I think I really like about your books is your knowledge and interest in your cultural history and your folklore and all these things that come together. And so my question to you is that, did you, when you were growing up in Texas, is that correct? Yeah. Was that something that you had to seek out? Was that something you, your family, was part of your family upbringing, or was it something you had to kind of seek out and find on your own?
Well, I mean, you know, there was always like those stories, La Llorona, La Lechuza, all the urban legends. I was told, Mestiza Blood, for example, talks about the dance hall devil. There's a story in South Texas where this woman danced with the devil in one of these, you know, dance halls, which are popular across Texas. And, you know, told those stories, but orally, you know, just like in passing. But you know, my mom worked, we lived with my grandfather. I had not the easiest upbringing. So I kind of dove into film and books. And so stuff, you know, being home alone a lot, I just did it myself. And then I left home at 18 for college. And yeah, it just kind of for a while, the priority was survival, like trying to pay for school, trying to eat, trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I didn't start writing till later, but I've always loved history. I've always been a bookworm. I've always had that desire. But again, the world says, well, you really can't do that. Do you see any Latina Stephen Kings? Do you see any Latina V.C. Andrews? No, you write nice, safe, magical realism or poetry, or, or you just don't do it at all. It's just a hobby. And so I loved writers like Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler. There was a lot of powerful Black female writers in film and in media. And I kind of clung to that and clung to those voices. And they by no means had it easy, but they definitely, paved the way in that sense. Octavia Butler has never gotten her due by any means. And, I now I'm like, you know what, I've got to succeed, because then I need that other generation to say, oh, well, she did it and she did that. And, there's all these more diverse voices that are paving the way even further and pushing for more and asking for more, not even asking, demanding for more. And even though at this time there's pushback, we're like, no, you deserve less. We don't want more of you. We want less of you. Shut up. That's, for me, well, that means we got to push harder. Well, that means we're going to call you out. That's why I'm going to write this book, and you are the villain. You are the bad guy. And, you can ban my books all you want. I still have social media. I can still write as much as I want. I can still self-publish. I can still have a Patreon. And I think that goes across the board for all marginalized writers who, writers from the LGBTQIA, anyone, the BIPOC community, like all of us, just, we have avenues. It's going to be harder. But now's the time to push.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I had one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm going to mash up but I'm learning, because this is one of my goals for the next few years. My colleague Maribel, I said, I want to learn Spanish, but I also want to read more so I can learn the Spanish, like, as I read books. So what is a curandero? And curandera is a ismo.
Yes.
Why does it run in generations? And what is the role in this larger cultural, spiritual community?
So, back in the day, it's kind of like, think of hoodoo, for example, and think of how people in their communities, people who are oppressed, have to be their own medicine people, their own midwives, their own everything, right? They have to come up with their own support system. So a curandera, traditionally is like a medicine woman, a curandero, a medicine man, but also it goes into the spiritual. So, yes, you have this ache. Oh, your baby, you don't know what's happening. Let's have a look. Or, you feel a big sadness. Well, let's have a plática, which is basically, let's talk about it. Let's have a limpia, which is a cleansing. And usually those things go hand in hand. Like, let's talk about what's happening and let's cleanse you. It's taking practical things that people need practically, both physically and spiritually, but also a sense of community. So they're just community, like medicine women, medicine men. And it's the practice of that. And that's why I wanted to, and it isn't always generational, but so in The Haunting of Alejandra, it is. So the Melanie, who is the psychotherapist, and she is a psychotherapist, but she's also practices, she's a curandera. And at one point, Alejandra is like, well, how can you have gone to medical school and, you know, have all of this practical scientific knowledge, but also have these spiritual beliefs and have these oils and have these crystals? And she's like, they can exist in the same world. Like, you don't have to be just one thing. You don't just have to be a psychotherapist. You can also try to heal people's souls and their bodies and their minds. They're all connected. And that's, you know, and that's the haunting of Alejandra. But that carries through a lot of my storytelling, and because it is easy to focus solely on the body, but forget the mind and the heart and the soul. And yeah, that's a long answer. Sorry.
No, because I was kind of wondering, you're in the UK now, so I wasn't sure if this was kind of like, because we have a lot more white witches and witchcraft and things like that. And I'm like blanking on the Wiccan beliefs and things like that. So I was just actually curious, like, if this was kind of some of that leaching in, or if you're just going back to Texas for the
same basic thing, but different culture.
Because I really like I like the way that a lot of different cultures have these same characters, but they have different names, but it's the same throughout, you know, and you realize it and you're like, okay, this has existed for thousands of years, like different people, different cultures. So that was really cool. All right. I could probably keep you going for the rest of the day. But I'm glad you've given us a lot to read. It's been really great. So Tiana, I'll let you have your final question.
No question. We're actually out of time, unfortunately. It always comes up fast, doesn't it? That 1 hour mark. V, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and sorry about that blip earlier. Thank you so much. I mean, I love talking about books and just trying to help where I can.
Yeah, and I really do hope you come back in October.
Yeah, I want to talk some goddesses. Let's talk about Kali and destruction.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. And everyone watching, the best way you can support V Castro is by purchasing, right? You can purchase from your favorite local bookstores. You can try to find them in your local libraries. Thank you for watching, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching on demand later. Thank you for giving us your time. You are why we do what we do. We have a lot of great programming coming up. Next week for Lunch and Learn, we're going to have disability activist Andrew Gurza joining us to talk about his new book, Notes from a Queer Cripple. As next Thursday, we have a community conversation titled Stitching a Loneliness Antidote. It's all about how needlework has been used as community and as a way of resistance. Especially now we need this conversation, so that's going to be fun. You can check out any other upcoming programs by visiting civilrights.mypgc.us. And you can find out what the library has going on by visiting pgcmls.info/events. Again, V, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, have a great day. We will see you soon.
And we love libraries. Librarians rock.
I didn't pay her to say that.
Bye.